The CEO millionaire never knew he had twin daughters, until they both appeared in his office with proof. What happened next will shock you. Like, share, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. The morning sun glinted off the glass walls of Sterling Tower, casting prismatic reflections across Alexander Sterling's immaculate desk. At 40 years old, he had built an empire that lesser men could only dream of. His fingers drummed methodically on the polished mahogany as he reviewed the final details of the Henderson merger, a deal worth billions that would cement Sterling Enterprises as the undisputed leader in tech innovation. "The terms are non-negotiable," Alexander said into the phone, his voice carrying the cool edge that had become his trademark in boardrooms across the country. "Henderson gets 30%, or we walk. I've indulged this conversation long enough." He ended the call without waiting for a response and glanced at his watch, a rare Swiss timepiece that cost more than most people's homes. The Henderson team would cave. They always did. No one could outlast Alexander Sterling in a battle of wills. It was simply a matter of time. His office, perched on the 68th floor, offered a panoramic view of the city he'd conquered. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a metropolis that seemed small from this height, controllable, just the way he liked everything in his life. The space was minimalist, all clean lines, modern art, and functional elegance. No personal photos cluttered his desk, no sentimental trinkets broke the sleek aesthetic. Relationships were messy, unpredictable. Alexander had learned long ago that success required focus. As if summoned by his thoughts, his assistant Jessica knocked tentatively at his door. "Enter," he called, not bothering to look up from the spreadsheet on his tablet. The door opened with a soft click, but Jessica's usual efficient report didn't follow. The silence finally pulled Alexander's attention from his work. His assistant stood frozen in the doorway, her typically composed expression replaced by something he rarely saw directed at him: pity. "Well," he prompted, impatience threading through the single syllable. "Sir," Jessica began, then faltered. Her hands fidgeted with the tablet she always carried. There are 2 young girls outside. They're asking to see you." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "And you're interrupting me for this because—" Jessica stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Sir, they say they're your daughters." For the first time in years, Alexander Sterling was caught completely off guard. A strange pressure built in his chest as he stared at his assistant. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in what might have been the beginning of a dismissive smile, but it never fully formed. "That's ridiculous," he finally said, his voice controlled once more. "I don't have children." "They're very insistent, sir. They say they have proof." Alexander's jaw tightened. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to extract money from him through outlandish claims. Usually they were dispatched efficiently by his legal team before they ever got near him. How had 2 children managed to get past security? "Send them in," he said after a moment, "and call legal." Jessica nodded and retreated. Seconds later, 2 small figures appeared in his doorway. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. They were identical. 2 girls, no more than 10 years old, with dark hair pulled back in matching ponytails. They wore simple, slightly worn dresses that spoke of modest means. But it was their eyes that caused Alexander's carefully maintained composure to crack. Sharp, ice-blue eyes, his eyes, stared back at him from faces that held an unmistakable resemblance to his own. The girls stepped into his office with surprising confidence, though he noticed how one slightly shielded the other, a protective gesture that seemed practiced. They stopped a few feet from his desk, staring up at him with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Mr. Sterling," the one in front began, her voice steadier than he would have expected, "you're our father." Alexander found himself speechless for perhaps the second time in his adult life. He studied their faces, searching for the deception, the trick that must be there. But all he saw were fragments of himself, the sharp angle of their jaws, the slight arch of their eyebrows. Even the way the braver one stood with her weight shifted to one side, exactly as he did when confronting an adversary. "That's impossible," he finally said, but the words lacked his usual conviction. The second girl, who had remained silent until now, reached into a worn backpack and pulled out a manila folder. She approached his desk cautiously and placed it before him, then quickly retreated to her sister's side. "Our mom's name was Sophia Reynolds," the first girl continued. She died 6 months ago. Before she died, she told us about you and gave us this. Alexander stared at the folder as if it might burst into flames. Sophia Reynolds. A name he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. 11 years to be exact. Their time together had been brief but intense, a rare moment of genuine connection in a life dedicated to ambition. When it ended, he had locked away the memory and moved forward, as he always did. With a steady hand that belied his inner turmoil, Alexander opened the folder. The first document was a DNA test, professional, comprehensive, with his name clearly listed as the paternal match for Emily and Lily Reynolds. Beneath it lay several photographs, himself, 11 years younger, with his arm around a laughing woman with warm brown eyes and a smile that had once managed to break through his carefully constructed walls. Sophia. The final item was a letter, sealed in an envelope with his name written in a familiar flowing script that caused an unexpected pang in his chest. He set it aside, unwilling to read her words while under the watchful gaze of these children, these girls who couldn't possibly be. And yet, the evidence was literally staring him in the face. This could be fabricated, he said, more to himself than to them. Mom said you might not believe us. The quieter one spoke for the first time. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but held the same resolve. She said you could do another test if you wanted. And who are you staying with now? Alexander asked, his business mind taking over, seeking practical details to ground this surreal moment. The girls exchanged a glance that communicated more than words. We were with our aunt for a while, the first one said. But she couldn't. It was hard for her. We've been in foster care for the past 3 months. Different homes. Her voice caught slightly on the last word. They keep trying to separate us, the quieter one added, her hand finding her sister's. Alexander stood abruptly, needing to put distance between himself and this unexpected complication. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city that had always made sense to him. Business, power, success. These were the constants in his life. Not family, never family. What are your names? He asked without turning around. I'm Emily, said the more outspoken twin. This is Lily. Emily and Lily. Daughters he never knew existed. The thought was so foreign, so completely at odds with the life he had built, that Alexander struggled to process it. And what exactly do you want from me? He asked, his voice carefully neutral as he turned to face them again. Emily straightened her shoulders. We don't want your money, if that's what you're asking. We don't have anywhere else to go. Mom said you might help us. Something in her voice, pride mingled with desperation, reminded Alexander so much of himself at that age that he felt momentarily unbalanced. He had clawed his way out of poverty, determined never to be vulnerable again. These girls, with their worn clothes and stubborn chins, were fighting their own battle for survival. This is a lot to take in, he said finally. I'll need to verify everything. We understand, Emily said, sounding far older than her years. Alexander pressed the intercom. Jessica, come in here, please. His assistant appeared almost immediately, her eyes darting curiously between Alexander and the twins. These are Emily and Lily Reynolds, Alexander said, careful not to use any term that might acknowledge the relationship they claimed. They'll be staying in the guest suite at my penthouse tonight while we sort some matters out. Please make the necessary arrangements and accompany them there. I'll join later. Jessica's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing her surprise, but she recovered quickly. Of course, Mr. Sterling. Right away. As she ushered the girls toward the door, the quieter one, Lily, turned back. Mr. Sterling, thank you. The simple gratitude in those 2 words hit Alexander with unexpected force. He nodded curtly, unwilling to examine the strange feeling taking root in his chest. When the door closed behind them, Alexander sank into his chair and opened the envelope from Sophia. Her letter was brief but devastating in its simple truth. Alexander, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and our daughters have found you. Yes, they are yours. I've never been with anyone else. I didn't tell you about them when I found out I was pregnant. You were building your empire, and I knew what that meant to you. Maybe that was wrong of me, but I gave our girls a good life, filled with love. I'm not asking you to be their father now. I'm only asking you to help them stay together. They're all each other has left. They're good girls, Alexander. They're smart and kind and stronger than they should have to be. They have your determination and more heart than either of us deserved. Whatever you decide, please remember they're innocent in all of this. The choices were ours, not theirs." Sophia Alexander read the letter twice, then set it down with uncharacteristic gentleness. He picked up one of the photographs, Sophia laughing in Central Park, her face turned up to the sun. He remembered that day with painful clarity. It was one of the last times he'd seen her before ending things, before deciding that his ambitions couldn't accommodate the distraction of love. He had made his choice 11 years ago. Now, that choice had returned in the form of two small girls, with his eyes and Sophia's smile. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Alexander Sterling had no idea what to do. The elevator ride to Alexander's penthouse felt interminable. After spending the remainder of the day in his office, ostensibly reviewing the Henderson contracts but actually staring unseeing at the same page for hours, he had finally concluded that avoiding the situation wouldn't make it disappear. A faint memory surfaced as the elevator climbed, Sophia asking him once about his childhood. He had given her the sanitized version, ambitious young man from modest beginnings, works hard and succeeds. He had omitted the cold reality of growing up with a father who saw him only as a disappointment and a mother too broken to protect him. He had promised himself long ago that he would never inflict that kind of pain on a child. His solution had been simple: no children. Yet, here he was. The elevator doors slid open to reveal his penthouse, 6,000 square feet of luxury that suddenly seemed cavernous and cold. He could hear faint voices from the kitchen area. Jessica appeared in the hallway. "Mr. Sterling, I ordered dinner for everyone. The girls are setting the table." She lowered her voice. "They insisted on helping. I've also arranged for a private investigator to verify their claim and their background. Results should be available by tomorrow afternoon." "Fine," Alexander said. "You can go home now." "Are you sure? I could—" "Good night, Jessica." She nodded, recognizing the dismissal. "The guest suite is prepared. Good night, sir." Alexander stood motionless after she left, listening to the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. Children in his home. The concept was so foreign, it seemed almost absurd. He moved silently down the hallway, pausing at the kitchen entrance. The twins worked in perfect synchrony, one placing napkins while the other carefully arranged silverware. They had changed into clean clothes, likely purchased by Jessica, that still had the new stiff look to them. "The forks go on the left," Lily was saying, gently correcting her sister's placement. "Does it really matter?" Emily asked, though she moved the fork anyway. "Mom always said details matter." "I don't think Mr. Sterling will care which side the fork is on." Alexander cleared his throat, and both girls startled, turning toward him with identical wide-eyed expressions. "The forks do go on the left," he confirmed, stepping into the kitchen. "But I wouldn't have noticed." An awkward silence followed as they regarded each other. Alexander was struck again by how much of himself he could see in them, not just in their features, but in the watchful, assessing way they observed him. They were gauging whether he was a threat, he realized. The thought was uncomfortable. "Your assistant ordered pizza," Emily finally said. "We hope that's okay." Alexander rarely ate anything as pedestrian as pizza, but he nodded. "That's fine." "We weren't sure where you usually eat," Lily added, gesturing to the formal dining table they had set. "There are so many rooms." "This is fine," he said again, growing increasingly aware of his limited conversational skills when it came to children. In the boardroom, he could outmaneuver anyone. Here, facing two small girls who might be his daughters, he felt strangely at a disadvantage. The doorbell rang, providing a welcome interruption. "That will be the food," he said, moving to answer it. Dinner was a stilted affair. The girls ate with the careful manners of children who had been taught proper etiquette, but with an underlying urgency that suggested they weren't always certain when their next meal would come. Alexander found himself eating mechanically, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure how to ask. "You have a nice place," Emily said, breaking the silence. "The view is amazing." "Thank you," Alexander replied automatically. "Our apartment with Mom was on the 3rd floor," Lily offered quietly. "We could see the park, but not like this." "Where did you live?" Alexander asked, seizing the opening. "Boston," Emily answered. "Mom was a teacher at Westridge Elementary. We lived close enough to walk to school." "A teacher." Alexander tried to reconcile the passionate, vibrant woman he had known with the image of a dedicated elementary school teacher. It fit somehow. Sophia had always been idealistic in a way he had both admired and dismissed as impractical. "And after she passed?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. The girls exchanged another of their communicative glances. "We stayed with Aunt Meredith for a while," Emily said, "but she travels a lot for work, and it was hard for her to want us," Lily finished when her sister faltered. The simple, devastating honesty of her words hung in the air. "After that, it was foster care," Emily continued. 3 different homes in 3 months. "They split us up last time," Lily said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It was only for 2 weeks, but it felt like forever." "How did you find me?" Alexander asked, partly to change the subject from their obvious pain, and partly because he was genuinely curious. "Mom left us a box," Emily explained. "She told us not to open it unless something happened to her. Inside was the letter for you, the photos, and newspaper articles about you. One had the address of your company. We saved up our allowance for bus tickets." "You came all the way from Boston by yourselves?" Alexander asked, unable to hide his surprise. Emily nodded. "We had to. No one else was going to help us stay together." The determination in her voice struck a chord in Alexander. How many times had he told himself the same thing as a child? That if he wanted something done, he would have to do it himself because no one else cared enough to help. "Well," he said, standing abruptly as the weight of their situation threatened to overwhelm him, "you must be tired. I'll show you to your room." He led them through the penthouse to the guest suite, a space decorated in neutral tones that had never actually hosted guests. Alexander didn't entertain at home. His rare social engagements were always conducted in restaurants or at charity functions, where he could make an appearance and leave when it suited him. "This is where you'll sleep tonight," he said, gesturing to the 2 queen beds. The girls gazed around the room with undisguised awe. "Both of us? Together?" Lily asked, hope evident in her voice. "Yes, of course," Alexander replied, puzzled by the question until he remembered what they had said about being separated in foster care. Something uncomfortable twisted in his stomach. "Thank you," Emily said formally, but the gratitude in her eyes was anything but formal. "There should be things in the bathroom," Alexander continued awkwardly. "Toothbrushes and whatever else you might need. Jessica would have arranged it." "Your assistant is really nice," Lily offered. "Yes, she's very efficient," Alexander agreed. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be—" He gestured vaguely toward the master suite on the opposite side of the penthouse. "Good night, then." He turned to leave, eager to escape the unfamiliar emotional tension filling the room. "Mr. Sterling," Emily called after him. "What happens tomorrow?" Alexander paused at the door. What did happen tomorrow? He had no idea. His meticulously planned life had been upended in the space of a day. "We'll figure that out in the morning," he said, the closest thing to an honest answer he could give. As he walked back through his silent, luxurious penthouse, Alexander felt like a stranger in his own home. His phone buzzed with messages from the office. The Henderson team had conceded to his terms, as he knew they would. The victory felt hollow in a way he couldn't quite define. In his bedroom, he removed his tie and sat heavily on the edge of his bed, Sophia's letter in his hands. He read it again, searching for clues, for some hint of what she would expect him to do now. But the letter offered no solutions, only the simple truth that 2 young lives hung in the balance. Alexander Sterling, the man who always had a strategy, who never entered any situation without at least 3 contingency plans, found himself completely out of his depth. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of a responsibility that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. He thought of the twin girls sleeping across the penthouse, their matching blue eyes, their quiet resilience, their obvious bond. His daughters. The concept was still too foreign to fully comprehend. Tomorrow, the DNA test results would confirm what he already suspected was true. Then what? Foster care was clearly not an option. The thought of them being separated again made something protective and unfamiliar stir within him. But what did he know about raising children? About being a father? Nothing. Less than nothing. His own father had provided only a blueprint for what not to do. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. All his life, he had pursued control, certainty, success. Now he faced the most uncontrollable, uncertain situation imaginable. And for once, the cost of failure wouldn't be measured in dollars, but in the well-being of two innocent lives. Sleep evaded him that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia's face, heard her laugh, felt the weight of her absence. And behind those memories lurked the knowledge that, for 10 years, his daughters had grown up without him. Not because he had abandoned them, but because he had never known they existed. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Alexander made a decision. He didn't know if it was the right one, but it was the only one he could live with. For now, the girls would stay with him, at least until he could ensure they would be safe and together. It wasn't a solution, it was barely even a plan. But as the first rays of sun crept into his bedroom, Alexander Sterling did something he had never done in business. He decided to take it one day at a time. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency. Sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows Alexander usually appreciated for their unobstructed views. Today the brightness felt like an intrusion. He had managed perhaps 3 hours of restless sleep, his dreams haunted by fragments of the past. Sophia's smile, her voice, the way she had looked at him the last time they were together. He stood in his kitchen, coffee in hand, when his phone buzzed with a message from his private investigator. DNA results expedited. Confirmation, 99.9% match. Detailed report to follow. Alexander set the phone down carefully. A part of him had still been clinging to the possibility that this was all some elaborate mistake or con. That slim hope had now vanished, replaced by an undeniable truth. He was a father. Had been for 10 years without knowing it. The sound of hesitant footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. The twins stood in the doorway, already dressed in their new clothes, hair neatly brushed. They looked so small in the vastness of his penthouse, yet their presence somehow filled the space in a way he couldn't explain. "Good morning," he said, his voice sounding strangely formal, even to his own ears. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," they responded in near-perfect unison. "Are you hungry? I can order something." Alexander realized with a jolt that his refrigerator contained little more than bottled water and protein shakes. He rarely ate at home, preferring the efficiency of meals at his office or business dinners. "We can make breakfast," Emily offered. "Mom taught us how. We just need to know what you have." "Not much, I'm afraid," Alexander admitted. He opened the refrigerator to reveal its sparse contents. "I usually eat at the office." The girls exchanged a glance that he was beginning to recognize as their silent communication. "We could have cereal," Lily suggested tentatively. "If you have any—" "I don't think—" Alexander began, then stopped himself. "Let me call down to the building restaurant. They can send something up." 20 minutes later, the three of them sat at the dining table with an assortment of breakfast foods that could have fed a small army. The girls ate with the same careful politeness as the night before, though he noticed their eyes widening at the selection. "The results came back," Alexander said abruptly, unable to postpone the conversation any longer. "The DNA test confirms that I'm your biological father." The twins stopped eating, their expressions a mixture of relief and apprehension. "So, you believe us now?" Emily asked. "Yes," Alexander said simply. "What happens to us?" Lily's quiet question hung in the air between them. Alexander took a deep breath. "For now, you'll stay here while I figure out arrangements." "You mean you're looking for someone else to take us?" Emily said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "I mean, I need time," Alexander replied, surprising himself with his honesty. "This isn't a situation I ever expected to be in. I don't know the first thing about being a father." "We don't need a father," Emily said, her chin lifting in a defiant gesture that was so familiar it was almost painful to witness. "We just need to stay together." "And you will," Alexander assured her, finding that he meant it. "I promise you that much. You won't be separated again." A silent tension filled the space between them, not hostile, but cautious. These children had already learned not to take promises at face value, he realized. They had been let down too many times. "I have to go to the office today," he continued. "Jessica will stay with you. She's arranging for some clothes and other things you might need." "We have clothes," Lily protested softly. "You have what fits in 2 backpacks," Alexander corrected, more gently than he would have thought himself capable of. "You'll need more." Neither girl argued, though he could see they were uncomfortable with the charity. Another trait they seemed to have inherited from him: stubborn pride. "Thank you," Emily finally said, the words clearly difficult for her. Alexander nodded, then glanced at his watch. "I need to get ready for work. Jessica will be here shortly." As he turned to leave, Lily's voice stopped him. "Mr. Sterling, can we ask you something?" He paused, turning back. "Yes?" "What should we call you?" she asked, her blue eyes, his eyes, watching him carefully. The question caught him off guard. Mr. Sterling seemed ridiculously formal for his biological daughters, yet the alternative stuck in his throat. "Alexander is fine for now," he said after a moment. The girls nodded, accepting this compromise without comment. As he walked away, Alexander felt an uncomfortable twinge of something like guilt, though he couldn't quite pinpoint its source. In his office that day, Alexander found himself unable to focus. The Henderson deal, which had consumed his attention for months, now seemed trivial compared to the situation unfolding in his personal life. He stared unseeing at contract pages, his mind returning repeatedly to the twins waiting in his penthouse. Around noon, his desk phone rang with an internal call from Jessica. "Sir, I thought you might want an update," she began without preamble. "The girls are settled. We've ordered some essential clothes and supplies. They've been very polite and helpful, actually. They offered to help with everything." "That's good," Alexander replied, unsure what else to say. "They asked if they could have books," Jessica continued. "Apparently they left most of their belongings behind when they came looking for you. I hope it's all right, but I ordered some age-appropriate titles based on what they said they enjoy." "That's fine," Alexander said, then added, "Thank you, Jessica." The words felt strange in his mouth. While he wasn't exactly rude to his staff, genuine gratitude was not something he expressed often. Efficiency was expected, not praised. "Of course, sir," Jessica replied, and he could hear the surprise in her voice. "Will you be home for dinner?" Home. The word struck him oddly. His penthouse had always been just a place to sleep, a convenient location close to the office. It had never truly felt like a home. Yet now there were children there, waiting. "Yes," he found himself saying. "I'll be home by 7. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls that Alexander navigated on autopilot. His mind kept returning to Sophia's letter, to the twins' quiet resilience, to the life he never knew existed parallel to his own. As he left the office that evening, his secretary reminded him of a critical dinner meeting with Japanese investors scheduled for the following night. Alexander paused. He had never missed a business engagement in his career, but the thought of leaving the twins alone in the penthouse with a stranger so soon after their arrival gave him pause. "Confirm the reservation," he said finally, "but push it back to 8 instead of 7. In the elevator to his penthouse, Alexander felt an unfamiliar nervousness. What was he supposed to do with 2 10-year-old girls for an entire evening? What did they expect from him? What did he expect from himself? The elevator doors opened to the sound of laughter, a light, melodious sound that seemed entirely out of place in his austere home. Following the sound, he found the twins and Jessica in the kitchen. Flour dusted the usually spotless countertops, and the air smelled of vanilla and chocolate. "Mr. Sterling," Jessica said, looking slightly flustered, "we were making cookies. The girls wanted to, well, they said it might be nice to have something homemade for dessert." "Mom always said cookies make any house feel like home," Lily added, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "I see," Alexander said, surveying the cheerful chaos that had invaded his kitchen. Strangely, he found he didn't mind it. "It smells good." The girls beamed at this small approval, their smiles so genuinely pleased that Alexander felt that strange twinge again. Not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. Regret, perhaps, for all the moments he had missed. "I'll leave you to enjoy your evening," Jessica said, gathering her things. "The cookies should be done in about 10 minutes. I've set the timer." "Thank you for your help today," Alexander said, again feeling the awkwardness of expressing gratitude. "It was my pleasure," Jessica replied, and he was surprised to see she meant it. "They're wonderful girls." She lowered her voice as she passed him. "They miss their mother very much. They mentioned her often today." After Jessica left, an uncomfortable silence descended. The twins looked at Alexander expectantly, and he realized they were waiting for him to take the lead. He was, after all, the adult, a fact he found strangely intimidating in this context. "Should we Check on the cookies? He suggested lamely. Emily nodded and moved to the oven, peering through the glass with a critical eye. Almost done. Mom taught us you can tell by the color around the edges. Your mother taught you to bake? Alexander asked, seizing on the opening. She taught us lots of things, Lily said, her expression softening with memory. She said girls should know how to take care of themselves, how to cook and clean and manage money. She was teaching us to change the oil in the car before she got sick, Emily added, pride evident in her voice. She said no one should be able to take advantage of us because we didn't know how something worked. It sounded exactly like the Sophia he had known, fiercely independent, determined to stand on her own feet. She had been the rare woman in his life who had wanted him, not what he could provide. She sounds like she was a wonderful mother, Alexander said quietly. The best, Emily agreed, her voice catching slightly. The timer dinged, breaking the emotional moment. The girls moved with practiced efficiency, removing the cookies from the oven and transferring them to a cooling rack. Their teamwork was seamless, each anticipating the other's movements in a dance born of long familiarity. We made dinner too, Lily said shyly. Jessica helped us order groceries and we wanted to thank you for letting us stay. Alexander was led to the dining table, where a simple but neatly prepared meal waited, pasta with marinara sauce, a salad, and garlic bread. It's nothing fancy, Emily added quickly, perhaps noting his surprise. But Mom said a home-cooked meal is always better than restaurant food. I'm sure it's excellent, Alexander said, sitting down at the table. The meal was indeed simple, but as they ate, Alexander found himself relaxing fractionally. The twins kept the conversation going, chatting about the books Jessica had ordered for them, asking cautious questions about his work, sharing small stories about their life with Sophia. They were careful, he noticed, to keep the conversation light, steering away from the more painful topics that hovered just beneath the surface. After dinner, Alexander found himself at a loss again. What did one do with children in the evening? Work was his usual activity, but that seemed inappropriate somehow. We usually watch a movie on Friday nights, Lily offered, as if sensing his dilemma. Mom would make popcorn, and we'd all sit on the couch together. I don't know if I have any movies suitable for children, Alexander said, thinking of his limited collection of foreign films and documentaries. Jessica showed us how to use your streaming service, Emily said. There's lots of movies there. And so Alexander Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar corporation, found himself sitting somewhat stiffly on his leather couch, while two 10-year-old girls debated the merits of various animated films. They eventually settled on one about a lost fish, which Alexander had vaguely heard of, but never had reason to watch. As the movie progressed, he noticed the twins gradually relaxing, their postures becoming less formal. By the halfway point, Lily had unconsciously shifted closer to him, her small body radiating warmth next to his arm. By the time the credits rolled, Emily had curled up on his other side, her head drooping with sleepiness. It was such a small thing, this casual physical contact, but it felt momentous to Alexander. When was the last time anyone had touched him without agenda or pretense? Had sought closeness simply for comfort's sake? Time for bed, I think, he said softly, gently extracting himself from between them. The girls nodded drowsily, following him to the guest suite. They disappeared into the bathroom to change into pajamas and brush their teeth, emerging in matching nightgowns that Jessica must have purchased. Good night, Alexander said, pausing at the door. Good night, Alexander, they replied, climbing into their separate beds. He had turned to leave when Lily's voice stopped him again. Mom used to check under the bed for monsters. Alexander blinked, caught off guard by the childish request from girls who had seemed so mature in other ways. Monsters? She knew there weren't really monsters, Emily clarified quickly, shooting her sister a look. It was just something she did to make us feel safe. The simple admission that they didn't feel safe struck Alexander with unexpected force. Of course they didn't feel safe. Their mother was gone. They had been bounced between homes, and now they were staying with a virtual stranger who happened to be their biological father. Without a word, Alexander walked to the first bed and made a show of checking underneath it. No monsters, he confirmed, then moved to the second bed and repeated the process. This one's clear too. Thank you, Lily said, her voice small but grateful. Alexander nodded and moved to the door again. If you need anything in the night, my room is just down the hall. As he closed their door, he heard Emily whisper to her sister, "He's not so bad, right?" Lily's reply was too soft to make out, but the hopeful note in her voice stayed with Alexander as he retreated to his own room. He sat on the edge of his bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 36 hours. His life, so carefully structured and controlled, had been completely upended by the arrival of two small girls, with his eyes and Sophia's smile. Tomorrow, he would need to make decisions about their schooling, about legal guardianship, about whether he was really capable of being what they needed. But for tonight, he had checked for monsters. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The weekend passed in a haze of awkward moments and surprising discoveries. Alexander, who typically works 7 days a week, found himself canceling meetings and delegating tasks to spend time with the twins. Not out of any sudden paternal instinct, he told himself, but because it was necessary to determine the best arrangement for their future. On Saturday morning, he walked into the kitchen to find the girls already awake, whispering over bowls of cereal Jessica had thoughtfully added to the grocery delivery. "Good morning," he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot they had somehow figured out how to operate. "Morning," they chorused, watching him with those unsettlingly perceptive blue eyes. "I thought perhaps we could go shopping today," Alexander said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He had never uttered that particular sentence before in his life. Shopping was something Jessica arranged, or the personal shopper he employed twice a year. "Shopping for what?" Emily asked cautiously. "Things you need. Clothes, shoes, whatever else girls your age require." Alexander took a sip of his coffee, hiding his discomfort behind the mug. "Jessica purchased some basics, but I'm sure there's more." The twins exchanged one of their silent communication glances. "We don't need much," Lily said softly. "We don't want to be a bother." "It's not a bother," Alexander replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. "It's a necessity." And so Alexander Sterling found himself in a department store for the first time in over a decade, following two hesitant girls through sections filled with clothes in sizes he'd never had reason to know existed. The experience was surreal. The CEO who routinely made billion-dollar decisions now debating the merits of sneakers versus sandals, of dresses versus jeans. The twins were frugal, he noticed, always checking price tags and gravitating towards sale racks. When he told them not to worry about the cost, they looked at him as if he'd suggested something mildly scandalous. "Mom always said to be careful with money," Emily explained, returning a sweater to the rack after seeing its price. "She said it doesn't grow on trees." "She was right," Alexander acknowledged. "But in this case, the money is there specifically for this purpose, for you." Eventually they relented, though their choices remained modest. By the end of the excursion, Alexander had learned more about children's clothing than he had ever anticipated knowing. He had also learned that the twins, despite being identical, had distinct preferences, Emily favoring blues and greens, practical clothes that allowed for movement, while Lily gravitated towards softer colors and more feminine styles. The following days established a tentative routine. Alexander arranged for tutors to assess the girls' education level while he decided on a suitable school. They were bright, the tutors reported, particularly in mathematics and reading. Sophia had clearly prioritized their education, despite what must have been limited resources as a single mother. Each night, Alexander found himself performing the ritual of checking for monsters, a task that grew less awkward with repetition. Sometimes he would linger afterward, listening as the girls talked softly to each other, occasionally catching fragments about their day, their mother, their uncertain future. On Wednesday evening, Alexander sat in his home office, reviewing school options when Jessica knocked on the door. "Sir, the girls are asking if you would help them with a math problem," she said. "They're working on the assignments the tutor left." Alexander frowned slightly. "Surely you could assist them?" Jessica smiled. "I offered, but Emily specifically asked for you. She said, and I quote, 'Alexander probably knows more about math than anyone.'" Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in Alexander's chest at the simple vote of confidence. "I'll be right there." He found the twins at the dining table, notebooks spread before them, pencils in hand. They looked up expectantly as he approached. "Jessica said you needed help with math?" he inquired, taking a seat across from them. Emily nodded. "It's these word problems about percentages. I think I'm doing it right, but Lily got a different answer." Alexander looked over their work, noting with approval the neat calculations and methodical approach. "You're both partially correct," he said after a moment. "Emily, you set up the equation properly, but made a calculation error here. And Lily, your calculation is correct, but you didn't account for the compound percentage." He explained the concept, watching their faces carefully for signs of confusion. Instead, he saw focused attention, questions forming behind those matching blue eyes. "So, it's like interest at the bank?" Lily asked. "It grows on itself?" "Exactly," Alexander confirmed, oddly pleased by her quick understanding. "Compound interest is the most powerful force in finance. The earlier you start saving, the more dramatic the effect." "Mom had a savings account for our college," Emily said, a shadow passing over her face. "She put money in every month, even when things were tight." Alexander felt that now familiar pang. Sophia had been planning for their future alone, making sacrifices he'd never had to consider. "That was very wise of her," he said quietly. "Education is important." "She said we could be anything we wanted," Lily replied, her pencil tracing patterns on her notebook. "She said girls can be scientists or doctors or business leaders, just like boys." "She was absolutely right," Alexander agreed. As he looked at their earnest faces, he found himself adding, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" The question seemed to surprise them, perhaps because so few adults had bothered to ask. "I want to be a doctor," Lily said after a moment, "to help sick people, like the ones who tried to help Mom." "I want to build things," Emily declared. "Bridges and skyscrapers and stuff. An engineer." Alexander nodded, finding these ambitions entirely fitting. "Those are excellent goals. Both require strong math skills, so let's make sure you understand these problems." They worked together for nearly an hour, the initial awkwardness giving way to a comfortable rhythm. Alexander found himself enjoying the process, the quick minds of the girls, their differing approaches to problems, their evident pleasure when they grasped a concept. It wasn't until Jessica appeared to remind him of an important conference call that Alexander realized how much time had passed. As he rose to leave, Emily looked up at him. "Thanks for helping us," she said, sincerity evident in her voice. "Yeah, you explain things really well," Lily added. "Better than our teacher at school." That warm feeling returned, stronger this time. "Any time," Alexander replied, and was startled to realize he meant it. That night, after his call, Alexander found himself standing in the doorway of the guest bedroom. No, the girls' bedroom now, he corrected mentally, watching them sleep. They had pushed the twin beds together, he noticed, their hands nearly touching across the small gap between mattresses. Even in sleep, they sought connection. Something about their vulnerability struck him deeply. These children, his children, had been through so much. The loss of their mother, the uncertainty of foster care, and now this strange limbo with a father who hadn't known they existed. Yet here they were, resilient and brave, facing each day with a quiet dignity that humbled him. Alexander retreated to his own room, thoughts churning. He had been approaching this situation as a temporary arrangement, a problem to be solved. But watching them sleep, he had felt something shift inside him, a recognition that perhaps this wasn't a problem at all, but an opportunity. A chance to know these remarkable children who carried his blood and Sophia's spirit. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant at the office, reminding him of tomorrow's board meeting, one he couldn't miss. The return to normalcy should have been comforting. Instead, Alexander found himself oddly reluctant to step back into his old routine, to leave the fragile new connection forming with the twins. The following morning, Alexander rose early, dressed in one of his impeccable suits, and was preparing to leave when he heard a soft sound behind him. Lily stood in the hallway, her face pale, hair tousled. "You're going to work?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes, I have an important meeting," Alexander replied, straightening his already perfect tie. "Jessica will be here soon to stay with you." Lily nodded, but something in her posture, a slight hunching of her shoulders, caught his attention. "Is something wrong?" he asked, checking his watch. He still had time before the meeting. "I don't feel very good," Lily admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "My stomach hurts and I'm cold." Alexander frowned, instinctively moving closer to place a hand on her forehead. Her skin felt hot to the touch. "You have a fever," he said, concern threading through his voice. "How long have you felt sick?" "Since last night," Lily whispered. "But I didn't want to bother you." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. This child, his child, had been sick and hadn't felt she could tell him. What kind of father did that make him? "You're never a bother," he said firmly. "Let's get you back to bed. I'll call the doctor." He led Lily back to the bedroom, where Emily was just waking up. Upon seeing her sister's condition, Emily immediately moved to her side. "She was hot all night," Emily reported, her voice matter of fact, but her eyes worried. "She kept saying she was okay, but I knew she wasn't." Alexander helped Lily into bed, his mind racing. The board meeting was crucial, but his daughter was sick. There had never been a conflict like this in his life before, never a moment when business wasn't the clear priority. "I'll call my doctor," he said, already pulling out his phone. "He can be here within the hour." What followed was a blur of activity. The doctor arrived, diagnosed Lily with a severe flu, and prescribed medication and rest. Emily hovered anxiously, refusing to leave her sister's side. And Alexander, to the shock of his board members, canceled his appearance at the meeting, joining only briefly via video conference before returning to Lily's bedside. By evening, Lily's fever had spiked dangerously high. The usually quiet, composed child was flushed and disoriented, her small body shaking with chills despite the blankets piled on her. Alexander paced the room, a new kind of fear gripping him, not the calculated concern of business risk, but the raw, primal terror of a parent watching their child suffer. "Should we take her to the hospital?" Emily asked, her own face pale with worry as she clutched her sister's hand. Alexander looked at Lily's flushed face, at the way her breathing seemed labored, and made an instant decision. "Yes. Get your shoes on. We're going now." He wrapped Lily in a blanket and lifted her into his arms. She felt impossibly light, fragile in a way that made his heart constrict. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her skin burning through his shirt. "It's going to be all right," he promised, though he had no way of knowing if it was true. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling felt completely powerless. The ride to the hospital was the longest of Alexander's life. Lily, semi-conscious in his arms, mumbled incoherently about her mother. Emily sat beside them, her face a mask of forced calm that no 10-year-old should have had to wear. Alexander found himself praying, actually praying, to a God he hadn't acknowledged in decades. At the hospital, his name and money guaranteed immediate attention. Lily was whisked away for tests and treatment, while Alexander and Emily were left in a private waiting area, the silence between them heavy with shared fear. "She's going to be okay, right?" Emily asked finally, her brave facade cracking to reveal the frightened child beneath. Alexander wanted to offer platitudes, to promise that everything would be fine. But looking at Emily's earnest face, he couldn't bring himself to pretend certainty he didn't feel. "The doctors here are excellent," he said instead, reaching out hesitantly to take her hand. "They'll do everything possible." Emily nodded, accepting this honest answer with surprising maturity. She squeezed his hand tightly, and Alexander felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his daughter, turning to him for comfort and strength. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and strangely empowering. Hours passed in the sterile hospital waiting room. Alexander, who prided himself on his patience in business negotiations, found each minute excruciating. Emily had finally fallen asleep, curled uncomfortably in the chair beside him, her head resting against his arm. He didn't move, despite the pins and needles spreading through his limb, unwilling to disturb her rare moment of peace. When the doctor finally appeared, Alexander carefully extracted himself from Emily, who stirred but didn't wake. "Mr. Sterling," the doctor said in a low voice, mindful of the sleeping child. "Your daughter has a severe case of influenza that's developed into pneumonia. Her condition is serious, but we've started her on antibiotics and antiviral medications. She's stabilized for now." "Can I see her?" Alexander asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and worry. The doctor nodded. "She's asking for you and her sister. We've moved her to a private room." Alexander gently woke Emily, whose first panicked question was about her twin. "She's sick, but she's getting good care," he assured her, choosing his words carefully. "The doctor says we can see her now. Lily looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and an IV drip. Her face was still flushed with fever, but her eyes cleared when she saw them enter. "Emily," she whispered, reaching out her hand. "Alexander." Emily rushed to her sister's side, tears finally breaking through her stoic facade. Alexander hung back, suddenly uncertain of his place in this intensely personal moment between the twins. But then Lily looked past her sister, directly at him. "You stayed," she said simply, as if this fact surprised her. Alexander moved to the bedside. "Of course I stayed." "But your meeting," Lily persisted weakly. "Jessica said it was important." "Not as important as you," Alexander replied, the truth of the words resonating deep within him. He reached out hesitantly, then gently smoothed back her damp hair. "I'm not going anywhere." The relief in Lily's eyes twisted something in Alexander's chest. How many adults had made and broken promises to these children? How many times had they been told they mattered, only to be abandoned when something more pressing came along? "I'm staying too," Emily declared fiercely, climbing carefully onto the edge of the bed. "We stick together, remember?" Lily nodded, her eyelids growing heavy as the medication pulled her towards sleep. "Family sticks together," she murmured. "That's what Mom always said. Family." The word echoed in Alexander's mind as he watched his daughters, one fighting illness, one fighting fear, both displaying a courage that humbled him. They were a family, these two children and him, connected by blood and now by something deeper that was taking root inside him. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hospital routines. Alexander refused to leave, conducting necessary business via phone and laptop from Lily's room. Emily was equally stubborn, leaving her sister's side only when the nurses insisted. Alexander arranged for a cot to be brought in, so they could both stay overnight, unwilling to separate the twins when Lily was so vulnerable. On the second day, as Lily slept peacefully, her fever finally broken, Alexander's phone buzzed with a call from Jessica. "Sir, there's something you should know," she said without preamble. "A woman from Child Protective Services came to the penthouse looking for you and the girls. She seemed concerned when I said you were at the hospital with Lily." Alexander frowned. "Did she say what she wanted?" "Only that there had been a development regarding the girls' guardianship situation. She left her card and asked that you call her immediately." A cold knot formed in Alexander's stomach. "Send me her information. I'll handle it." He glanced at the twins, Emily asleep on the cot, Lily resting peacefully in the hospital bed, and stepped quietly into the hallway to make the call. The woman from CPS was professional but direct. "Mr. Sterling, we've received an inquiry about the Reynolds twins. Their maternal great-aunt and her husband have filed for custody." "Great-aunt?" "Sophia never mentioned any great-aunt," Alexander said, suspicion immediately rising. "Marianne Holloway is Sophia Reynolds' maternal aunt. According to our records, there was limited contact between them during Ms. Reynolds' lifetime, but Mrs. Holloway and her husband are claiming family rights." "The girls have never mentioned her," Alexander countered, his business instincts kicking in. "Why would this woman suddenly want custody of children she's never shown interest in before?" The social worker paused. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the Holloway's motivations, Mr. Sterling, but I should inform you that they've raised questions about your suitability as a guardian, given your lack of relationship with the girls prior to their mother's death." "Because I didn't know they existed," Alexander said sharply. "Had I known, things would have been very different. Nevertheless, there will need to be a formal hearing to determine permanent guardianship. Given that you have no legal standing at this point beyond biological paternity, we'll need to schedule a home visit and interviews with both you and the girls." Alexander's mind raced, analyzing the situation as he would a hostile business takeover. "When?" "As soon as your daughter is released from the hospital. I understand she's quite ill." "Yes, she is," Alexander confirmed, his protective instincts flaring. "And she's receiving excellent care. Both girls will remain with me until this hearing." "Mr. Sterling," the social worker said carefully, "I should warn you that the Holloways are well connected. They've already engaged a family court attorney. They're claiming that your lifestyle isn't conducive to raising children." Alexander's jaw tightened. "My lifestyle is precisely what allows me to provide these girls with everything they need, including my undivided attention when they require it, as evidenced by the fact that I'm speaking to you from my daughter's hospital room, where I've been for the past 48 hours. After ending the call, Alexander stood motionless in the hallway, a storm of emotions churning inside him. The thought of the twins being taken away, placed with strangers who suddenly claimed family ties for unknown reasons, was intolerable. He had wealth and power, yes, but he'd learned the hard way that some things couldn't be secured through money or influence alone. When he returned to the room, he found Emily awake, watching him with concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, always perceptive. Alexander considered deflecting, then decided against it. These girls had faced enough uncertainty in their young lives. They deserved honesty. "There's been a complication," he said, sitting beside her on the cot. "Someone has come forward claiming they should have custody of you and Lily, your mother's aunt and her husband." Emily's face paled. "Great-Aunt Marianne? Mom never let us visit her. She said she was—" She trailed off, clearly editing her mother's words. "What did your mother say about her?" Alexander pressed gently. Emily glanced at her sleeping sister, then lowered her voice. "Mom said Aunt Marianne only cared about money, that she treated Mom badly after Grandma died because Mom wouldn't sell Grandma's house right away." Alexander filed this information away, his suspicions growing. "Do you know if your mother left anything valuable? Besides the obvious treasure of you two," he added, earning a small smile from Emily. She shrugged. "Just the house, I guess. Mom said it was paid for, and that it would be ours someday. But we had to leave it when we went to Aunt Meredith's. A house, free and clear. In Boston's real estate market, potentially worth a significant sum." Alexander's business mind immediately connected the dots. "Emily," he said carefully, "I want you to know that I'm going to make sure you and Lily stay together, no matter what." Emily studied his face with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "With you? Or with Great-Aunt Marianne?" The question hung in the air between them. A week ago, Alexander might have hesitated, might have considered the easier path of allowing these children to go to their blood relatives, freeing him to return to his uncomplicated life. But that was before Lily's illness, before late-night monster checks and homework help, before he'd felt the weight of Emily's head against his arm as she slept, trusting him to keep watch. "With me," he said firmly, "if that's what you want." Emily's eyes welled with tears, a rare crack in her strong facade. "It's what we both want. Lily's been worried you'd send us away once you got tired of having kids around." "I'm not going to get tired of you," Alexander promised, surprising himself with the depth of feeling behind the words. "We're family." The next day, Lily was well enough to be discharged. As Alexander helped her into the wheelchair that hospital policy required, his phone buzzed with a message from his office. The Henderson deal was in final negotiations, and his CFO was practically begging for his input on some last-minute terms. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, the same time as their first interview with the Child Protective Services caseworker. Alexander stared at the message, the choice before him crystallizing with unexpected clarity. For his entire adult life, business had come first. Each sacrifice of personal connection had been justified by his growing empire, by the security and power he'd accumulated. Now, for the first time, the cost seemed too high. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked, noticing his distraction. Alexander tucked the phone away. "Everything's fine. Let's get you home." That night, after settling Lily comfortably in the bedroom, which he now thought of definitively as the girls' room, Alexander made a series of calls to his lawyer, instructing him to begin formal adoption proceedings, to a private investigator, requesting a thorough background check on Marianne Holloway and her husband, and finally to his CFO. "I won't be at the Henderson meeting," he said without preamble, "but sir, we need you have my notes and my authorization parameters. I trust you to handle it." "Sir, with all due respect, this deal represents billions in potential." "Family comes first, Marcus," Alexander interrupted, the words feeling strange but right on his tongue. "My daughters need me tomorrow. The company will survive without me for one meeting." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Your daughters, sir?" "That's correct. I'll explain when I'm back in the office. For now, handle Henderson. That's what I pay you for." After ending the call, Alexander walked to the doorway of the girls' room, watching them sleep. They had pushed the beds together again, Emily protectively close to her still recovering sister. Something profound and permanent had shifted inside him during those long hours at the hospital. He had walked in as a reluctant guardian and emerged as something different, a father. The next morning, Alexander greeted the CPS caseworker, dressed not in his usual impeccable suit, but in casual slacks and a simple button-down shirt. He had spent the early hours preparing the penthouse, ensuring the girls' presence was visible, their books on the shelves, their artwork magneted to the refrigerator, their shoes neatly paired in the entryway. Small signs that this was no longer just his space, but theirs as well. A home, not merely a residence. "Mr. Sterling," the caseworker said as she entered, her eyes taking in the unexpected domesticity of the scene. "I appreciate you making time for this meeting." "My daughters come first," Alexander replied simply, leading her to the living area where the twins waited, nervous but composed. "I've canceled all other engagements." The comment did not go unnoticed, a small note scribbled on the caseworker's pad. The interview proceeded, more thorough than Alexander had anticipated. Questions about his work schedule, his support system, his understanding of the girls' emotional needs. Through it all, he answered honestly, neither minimizing the challenges nor exaggerating his capabilities. When the caseworker asked to speak with the twins alone, Alexander stepped out onto the terrace, anxiety buzzing through him in a way no business negotiation had ever triggered. So much hung in the balance, not market share or profit margins, but something immeasurably more valuable. After what seemed an eternity, the caseworker emerged, her professional mask giving away nothing. "The girls are remarkably poised," she commented, "and clearly attached to you, despite the short time you've been in their lives." "They're extraordinary children," Alexander agreed. "Their mother did an amazing job raising them. Yes, that much is evident." The caseworker hesitated, then added, "Mr. Sterling, I should inform you that the hearing has been scheduled for next Monday. The Holloways will be present with their attorney. It would be advisable for you to have legal representation as well." "Already arranged," Alexander assured her. "What are my chances?" The caseworker's expression softened slightly. "I can't predict the outcome, but I will note in my report that the children are settled and well cared for here, and that they have expressed a strong preference to remain with you. That carries significant weight." After she left, Alexander found the twins in the kitchen, attempting to bake cookies, a gesture he recognized as their way of coping with stress. "How did we do?" Emily asked anxiously. "Did we say the right things?" Alexander reached out, gently wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek. "You were perfect, just honest, which is all anyone could ask." "Are they going to make us go with Great Aunt Marianne?" Lily's voice was small, her illness having left her more vulnerable than usual. "No," Alexander said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel, but was determined to make reality. "I won't let that happen." That evening, as the girls slept, Alexander received a call from his CFO. The Henderson deal had closed, not quite on the terms Alexander had outlined, but close enough. The company's stock would take a minor hit, but nothing catastrophic. "Could have been better if you'd been there," Marcus said, a hint of reproach in his tone. "But not worth what it would have cost," Alexander replied. "Sometimes, Marcus, the price is too high, no matter the potential gain." As he hung up, Alexander realized with startling clarity that he meant every word. For the first time in his life, something mattered more to him than business success. The path ahead would not be easy. The court battle, the adjustment to fatherhood, the inevitable challenges of raising two grieving children. But watching the steady rise and fall of his daughter's breathing from the doorway, Alexander Sterling knew with absolute certainty that no merger, no acquisition, no business triumph could ever compare to what he had found in these two small girls, with his eyes and Sophia's smile. The weekend before the custody hearing passed in a flurry of preparation. Alexander's attorney, the best family court lawyer in the state, came to the penthouse to prepare the twins for what to expect. The girls listened solemnly, their hands clasped together, occasionally exchanging those silent communications that never ceased to fascinate Alexander. "Remember," the attorney said gently, "just tell the truth. The judge wants to know how you feel and what you want." "We want to stay together," Emily said firmly. "With Alexander." The lawyer nodded. "That's good, but the judge might ask why, not just because we want to, but specific reasons." The twins fell silent, considering this. "Because he checks for monsters," Lily finally offered, her voice soft but sure. "Even though he knows they're not real." Because he helps us with math and doesn't get mad when we don't understand right away, Emily added. Because he stayed at the hospital the whole time I was sick. Because he looks sad when we talk about Mom, like he misses her too. Alexander, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the room, felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. These simple observations from the children, the small gestures he'd made without thinking, apparently meant everything to them. "Those are excellent answers," the lawyer assured them with a smile. "Just be yourselves and speak from the heart." Later that evening, after the lawyer had left, Alexander found himself sitting between the twins on the couch, a position that had somehow become natural in recent days. They were watching a documentary about ocean life, the girl's choice to his surprise. He would have expected cartoons. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" Lily asked suddenly, her perceptive gaze fixed on his face. Alexander considered deflecting, then opted for honesty. "Yes, it's important, and I want it to go well." "Great Aunt Marianne is kind of scary," Emily admitted. "She always wears these really pointy shoes and looks at you like she's measuring how much you're worth." "Mom didn't like her," Lily added. "She said Aunt Marianne tried to make Grandma change her will before she died." The pieces clicked together in Alexander's mind. If Sophia's mother had left her house to Sophia, bypassing her sister Marianne, and now Sophia had left it to her daughters, the great-aunt's sudden interest in guardianship made perfect, calculated sense. It wasn't about the girls at all. It was about property. "You don't have to be afraid of her," Alexander said, careful to keep his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "No matter what happens in court tomorrow, I promise you'll be safe." "But what if the judge doesn't let us stay with you?" Lily's question hung in the air. Alexander put his arms around both girls, drawing them closer. "I won't let anyone separate you two, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you stay with me. That's a promise." Monday morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day that belied the tension in the Sterling household. Alexander helped the girls dress in the new outfits they had chosen together. Simple but nice dresses that made them look their age, not the miniature adults that Alexander suspected the Holloways might present. He wanted the judge to see them as they were, children who deserved stability and love, not pawns in an adult's financial scheme. The family court was less imposing than Alexander had expected, designed to be less intimidating for the children whose fates were decided within its walls. Nevertheless, he felt Emily's hand slip into his as they entered, her usual confidence wavering. Lily stayed close to his other side, her still recovering body tiring easily. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Alexander spotted them immediately, an older couple, impeccably dressed, the woman wearing the pointed shoes Emily had described. Her eyes, calculating and cold, fixed on the twins with an acquisitive gleam that made Alexander instinctively move to shield the girls. "Those are the Holloways," he murmured to his attorney. The lawyer nodded. "I've done some research on them. 3 previous divorces between them, no children of their own, and a history of real estate investments that often seem to coincide with family tragedies. Nothing illegal, but certainly opportunistic." Alexander's jaw tightened. "They're not getting my daughters." The proceedings began formally, with the judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, reviewing the case file. The Holloway's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of concerned relatives seeking to provide a traditional family environment for their great-nieces after the tragic loss of their mother. "Mr. Sterling, while biologically related to the children, has no experience as a parent," the attorney argued smoothly. "His lifestyle as a CEO of a major corporation leaves little time for childcare. The girls would benefit from the stability and full-time attention my clients can provide in their family home." Alexander's attorney countered with facts. Alexander's immediate assumption of responsibility upon learning of the girls' existence, his provision of educational opportunities, his demonstrated willingness to prioritize their needs, as evidenced by his actions during Lily's illness. "Moreover," she added, "the children have expressed a strong preference to remain with their father, a preference that should carry significant weight, given their age and maturity." The judge turned her attention to the twins, who sat together at a small table set up especially for them. "Emily and Lily," she said, her voice gentler than before, "I'd like to hear from you. How do you feel about living with Mr. Sterling?" The girls looked at each other, their silent communication passing between them. Then Emily, always the braver one, spoke first. "We want to stay with Alexander," she said clearly. "He's our dad, and he's taking good care of us. Can you tell me why you feel that way? The judge prompted. Emily straightened, her chin lifting in that gesture so reminiscent of Alexander himself. He makes us feel safe. When Lily got sick, he stayed with her the whole time. He didn't leave, even when his work people kept calling. He helps us with homework, Lily added softly. And he listens when we talk about Mom. He doesn't try to make us forget her. And what about Mrs. Holloway and her husband? The judge asked. They are your family too. The twins exchanged another look. We hardly know them, Emily replied honestly. They only came to see Mom once when she was sick, and they didn't stay long. They never sent birthday cards or called or anything. Mom didn't trust them, Lily said, her quiet voice somehow filling the courtroom. She made us promise to keep each other safe if anything happened to her. She wouldn't want us to go with them. A small murmur ran through the courtroom. Alexander sat very still, his heart pounding. The Holloway's attorney quickly intervened, suggesting that the children were too young to understand adult relationships and might have misinterpreted their mother's words. The judge silenced this with a raised hand. I'd like to hear from Mr. Sterling now. Alexander approached the witness stand, acutely aware of the twins watching him, of the Holloway's calculating stares, of how much hung on what he would say. After being sworn in, he faced the judge directly. Your Honor, 2 weeks ago, I didn't know I was a father. I had built my life around work, around achievement. I believed that was enough. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I was wrong. He glanced at the twins, drawing strength from their matching blue eyes. His eyes. These past 2 weeks have taught me more about what matters than the previous 40 years of my life. I've learned that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. I've learned that the sound of my daughter's laughter is worth more than any business deal. I've learned that checking for monsters and helping with homework brings more satisfaction than closing a billion-dollar merger. Alexander turned back to the judge. I can't claim to be an experienced father. I'm learning every day, but I can promise this. Those girls will never doubt that they come first in my life. They will never wonder if they matter. They will never be separated. And they will never feel that they have to face life's hardships alone the way they did after their mother died. Pretty words, Mr. Sterling, the judge commented, though her expression had softened slightly. But raising children requires more than good intentions. It requires time, patience, and consistency. Your career demands make these difficult to provide. Which is why, Alexander replied steadily, I've restructured my role at Sterling Enterprises. I've promoted my CFO to Chief Operating Officer, delegated day-to-day operations, and established boundaries that protect family time. My work will no longer require regular travel or 18-hour days. This was not something he had discussed with his attorney, who looked as surprised as everyone else in the courtroom. It was a decision Alexander had made the night before, lying awake considering what truly mattered. That's a significant life change, the judge observed. One might wonder if it's sustainable. One might, Alexander agreed, if they didn't understand what's at stake. He looked at Emily and Lily again. But when you find something truly precious, you don't hesitate to rearrange your life to protect it. The Holloway's attorney attempted to undermine Alexander's testimony, pointing to his past as a workaholic, questioning his sudden transformation, suggesting that the novelty of fatherhood would wear off. But, with each question, Alexander remained steady, his responses thoughtful and genuine. When asked directly about the property in Boston, Sophia's house that the girls had mentioned, Alexander was prepared. Yes, I'm aware of the house, and yes, I understand it represents a significant financial asset, which is why I've already established a trust for the girls, with independent trustees to manage it until they reach adulthood. Neither I nor the Holloways will have access to those funds. Mrs. Holloway's face tightened visibly, her husband shifting uncomfortably beside her. After both sides had presented their cases, the judge called a brief recess to consider her decision. Alexander sat with the twins in a quiet corner of the waiting area, his attorney keeping the Holloways at a distance. You did great in there, he told the girls. I'm proud of you both. You too, Emily replied with a small smile. Did you mean what you said about changing your job? Alexander nodded. Every word. Some things are more important than work. But you built your company, Lily said, concern in her voice. Mom told us it was your life's work. It was, Alexander agreed. But now I have something more important to build. He hesitated, then added softly, a family. The word hung between them, fragile and new, yet somehow right. Before the girls could respond, they were called back into the courtroom. The judge's expression gave nothing away as she delivered her ruling. Having considered the evidence and testimonies presented, I find that the best interest of Emily and Lily Reynolds is served by awarding full legal custody to their biological father, Alexander Sterling. The twins gasped in unison, their hands finding each other's, and then, to Alexander's surprise and joy, reaching for his as well. Mr. Sterling has demonstrated a genuine commitment to the children's welfare, the judge continued, and the children have clearly expressed their preference to remain in his care. The court finds no compelling reason to place them with their great-aunt and uncle, whose previous lack of involvement in their lives suggests that their interest is not primarily motivated by the children's welfare. Mrs. Holloway's face darkened with anger, but her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm. They had lost, and they knew it. Furthermore, the judge added, looking directly at Alexander, the court is impressed by Mr. Sterling's willingness to make significant life changes to accommodate his new responsibilities as a father. Such commitment speaks volumes. She turned her attention to the twins. Emily and Lily, you have shown remarkable courage and maturity throughout this difficult time. I wish you and your father all the best as you build your life together. The formalities concluded quickly after that. Alexander signed the necessary paperwork, accepted congratulations from his attorney, and finally turned to his daughters, officially, legally, permanently, his daughters. Let's go home, he said simply. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet, all three of them emotionally drained by the intensity of the day. But it was a comfortable silence, untroubled by the uncertainties that had plagued them before. As they entered the penthouse, Alexander noticed how different it looked now compared to just 2 weeks ago. Children's books on the shelves, a half-completed puzzle on the coffee table, small shoes by the door, evidence of lives being lived, not just a space to exist in between work commitments. What should we do now? Lily asked, looking up at him. Alexander considered the question. In the past, he would have immediately returned to work after such an absence, catching up on emails, checking in with his executive team. But those priorities had shifted, rearranged by the presence of these two remarkable children who had turned his life upside down in the best possible way. Whatever you want, he told them. We're celebrating. The twins exchanged one of their looks, then Emily grinned. Movie night? With popcorn? And ice cream? Lily added hopefully. Alexander laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even himself with its warmth. Movie night it is, with popcorn and ice cream. As the evening settled around them, the three curled up on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them, a children's movie playing on the massive screen that had previously shown only financial news and business presentations. Emily and Lily had again gravitated to either side of him, their small bodies warm against his arms. Midway through the film, Lily looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious. Alexander? Yes, he responded, still not quite used to hearing his name in her small voice. Do you think... She hesitated, glancing at her sister for support. Do you think we could call you Dad now, since it's official and everything? The question hit Alexander with unexpected force, a final piece falling into place. He had legally become their father today, but this simple request felt like the true transition, the real acceptance of his new role. I would like that very much, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Emily, never one to be left behind, immediately tested the new title. Thanks, Dad. The word hung in the air for a moment, strange and wonderful. Then Lily reached up and placed her small hand against his cheek, where a tear he hadn't realized he'd shed had fallen. Dad, she said softly, as if trying out the feel of it, do you think Mom would be happy about us being together like this? Alexander covered her hand with his own, thinking of Sophia, her warmth, her independence, her fierce love for these children that was evident in every aspect of who they had become. Yes, he said with absolute certainty. I think she'd be proud of all of us. The twins snuggled closer, their attention returning to the movie. But Alexander found himself watching them instead of the screen, marveling at how completely they had transformed his world in just 2 short weeks. His perfectly controlled life had been utterly disrupted, his priorities completely rearranged, His heart opened in ways he had never imagined possible, and he wouldn't change a single thing. The penthouse that had once felt like a showcase, all clean lines and designer furnishings, now felt like something else entirely. With children's laughter echoing off its walls, with small shoes kicked off by the couch, with the smell of popcorn and the glow of a children's movie illuminating the room, it had finally, truly become a home.